Egypt. Egypt, or Mitzrayim in Hebrew, is by far the most frequently mentioned African land in the Bible. It appears more than 600 times. In Genesis, Abraham fled to Egypt during famine, and later, Joseph was sold there as a slave before rising to power under Pharaoh. Egypt became the place where Jacob's family resettled, setting the stage for the Israelite story. The most defining episode, of course, is the Exodus. For centuries, Israel was enslaved in Egypt. Moses, raised in Pharaoh's household, later led them out through miracles like the plagues and the crossing of the Red Sea. Because of this, Egypt symbolizes both refuge and oppression in biblical memory. Later, Egypt also appears as a place of safety. For example, in Matthew's Gospel, Mary and Joseph fled with baby Jesus to Egypt to escape King Herod. In prophetic texts like Isaiah and Jeremiah, Egypt is often portrayed as a powerful but unreliable ally. Politically, it was the great southern empire, and spiritually, it became a symbol of both wealth and worldly power that God's people were warned not to depend on. So, Egypt or Mitzrayim isn't just geography, it's a recurring stage where faith, power, and survival collide. Cush, the Hebrew word for Ethiopia or Nubia, appears dozens of times. It refers to the land south of Egypt, which corresponds to modern Sudan and parts of Ethiopia. Genesis lists Cush as a descendant of Ham, the son of Noah. Geographically, the land of Cush is described near the rivers that flowed out of Eden in Genesis 2. Later, the prophets describe Cush as a strong and distant nation. One striking detail is that Moses married a Cushite woman, mentioned in Numbers 12. This caused controversy among his siblings, showing how people viewed Cush as both familiar and foreign. Cush was known for warriors and wealth. Isaiah 18 calls it a nation tall and smooth-skinned, sending envoys across the waters. Jeremiah and Ezekiel mention Cushite armies serving alongside Egypt. In Nahum, Cush is remembered as an ally of Thebes. The image of Cush in Scripture is one of strength at the edge of the known world. It is far but not irrelevant. In the book of Acts, the famous Ethiopian eunuch who converts to Christianity shows how Cush remained spiritually significant well into the New Testament. So, Cush represents Africa's southern power, both politically and spiritually connected to biblical history. Put. Another son of Ham is usually identified with Libya or the wider North African coast west of Egypt. Though less famous than Egypt or Cush, it carries weight in military and prophetic contexts. In Jeremiah 46, Put is listed as one of Egypt's allies in battle. Ezekiel 27 describes Put supplying warriors to Tyre. And in Ezekiel 30, it is grouped with Cush and Lydia as Egypt's partners. Nahum also links Put with Thebes. This pattern shows us something, which is that Put was known not for its kings or cities, but for its fighters. They were remembered as skilled mercenaries, part of North Africa's role in ancient Mediterranean power struggles. In Genesis 10, Put appears in the Table of Nations as one of Ham's sons, establishing its place in the biblical worldview of humanity's spread. Though not central to Israel's story, Put's repeated appearance in prophecies tells us it mattered. To the biblical writers, when you thought of the great forces gathered against or alongside empires, Put was there. So while Put might not have the drama of Egypt or the mystery of Cush, it represents Africa's western flank, part of the biblical horizon of nations. Cyrene. Moving into the New Testament, Cyrene becomes one of the clearest African cities in the story. Located in modern-day Libya, it was a Greek colony that later came under Roman control. Cyrene first appears in Acts 2, when Jews from Cyrene are listed among those present at Pentecost. This shows that North African Jews were part of the early Christian audience. But the most famous mention is Simon of Cyrene. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Simon is forced to carry Jesus' cross on the way to Golgotha. This detail forever links Cyrene to the central moment of Christian faith. Cyrene also reappears in Acts 11, where believers from Cyprus and Cyrene spread the gospel to Greeks in Antioch, effectively helping to launch the global mission of the church. In Acts 13, Lucius of Cyrene is listed among prophets and teachers in the Antioch church, so while small in number of mentions, Cyrene plays an oversized role. It ties Africa directly into the heart of the gospel narrative, through Simon's act on the Via Dolorosa and through missionaries who shaped the church's growth. Sheba or Shiva in Hebrew, has long been debated. Was it in Arabia, in modern Yemen, or in Ethiopia across the Red Sea? The Bible itself leaves space for both interpretations, and history shows strong ties between the two regions. The most famous story is the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon in 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9. She came with camels loaded with spices, gold, and precious stones, testing Solomon's wisdom. The story highlights Sheba as a land of wealth and international renown. Psalm 72 imagines kings from Sheba bringing tribute, and Isaiah 60 describes Sheba's wealth being brought to honor the Lord. In Job 1, raiders from Sheba are mentioned, showing it was also known for powerful tribes. In tradition, Sheba often became linked with Ethiopia, especially through Ethiopian royal lineage tracing back to the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. Whether located in Arabia or Africa, its biblical image is clear. Sheba is exotic, rich, and spiritually curious. So Sheba embodies Africa's and Arabia's crossroads, a place of gold, questions, and royal encounters. Pathros. Pathros is less familiar today, but it mattered in the Bible. It refers to Upper Egypt, the southern part of the Nile Valley. Isaiah 11:11 lists Pathros as one of the lands from which God will gather his scattered people. Jeremiah 44 mentions Jewish refugees living in Pathros after Jerusalem's fall. In Ezekiel 29 and 30, Pathros is part of prophecies against Egypt. The key idea is that Pathros was seen as deep Egypt, not the Nile Delta, but further south, closer to Nubia. It represented Egypt's heartland. What stands out is that even in exile, Jewish communities were living there. After Babylon's conquest, many Judeans fled not just to Egypt in general, but specifically to Pathros. This shows us that Africa was more than a neighboring empire, it was a place of refuge and survival, even if temporary. So, Pathros captures the image of Upper Egypt as both a cultural center and a biblical setting for scattered Israel. Tahpanhes. Tahpanhes, known today as Tel Tahpanhes in Egypt, was a frontier city in the eastern Nile Delta. It had strong ties with foreign powers and appears in Jeremiah's story. In Jeremiah 43, after Jerusalem's destruction, some Judeans dragged the prophet into Egypt against his warnings. They arrived at Tahpanhes, and there Jeremiah gave a symbolic prophecy. He buried stones at the entrance to Pharaoh's palace, declaring that Babylon's king would set his throne there. This moment makes Tahpanhes symbolic. It wasn't just a city, it became the stage where God's message about judgment and empire was dramatically acted out. The city's position also mattered. As a border fortress, it was where politics, trade, and migration converged. To the biblical writers, Tahpanhes was both literal geography and prophetic theater. So, Tahpanhes shows how African cities weren't just faraway names, they were living places where prophecy, politics, and survival collided. Lehabim. Finally, we have the Lehabim, another group linked to North Africa. In Genesis 10, they are listed as descendants of Mizraim, making them part of Egypt's extended peoples. Many scholars associate them with Libyan tribes. Though brief in mention, the Lehabim matter because they represent how the Bible mapped Africa's nations. They weren't seen as isolated. They were woven into the genealogy of Noah's sons, part of the grand human family. In later writings, the memory of Libyan peoples as warriors and desert dwellers carries forward the idea of Africa's western territories being part of the biblical worldview. So, Lehabim may not have a dramatic narrative, but they complete the picture. They remind us that Africa's peoples were always part of the biblical map, named alongside Cush, Put, and Mizraim.